All right, I'm going to be very interested in talking to this gentleman, and we're going to take some time with this interview, this one in particular, because I believe personally, in the 9/11 truth movement, we tend to think that whatever the latest incident that has happened is the most relevant issue facing our movement and trying to prove whether or not there was inside job involved. We think that, but I think what we're going to be talking about right now is the biggest issue facing our movement, our cause for 9/11 truth in the future and even in the present too. It is internet censorship, and this guy is all over it. We've had him on 9/11 Free Fall, as you saw there. His name is Zach Vorhies. He's a former Google employee who released 950 pages of internal documents to the Department of Justice, which outlined the company's program of censorship that is corrupting the search features on its platform, as well as YouTube. This includes blacklists and secret page rank scores. I don't think we rank very high, since when you type in 9/11 truth, a bunch of mainstream media stuff pops up. His book, which he wrote with Kent Heckenlively, is Google Leaks, a Whistleblower's Expose of Big Tech Censorship. So, Mr. Vorhies, welcome to the 24th hour anniversary event. Well, and your audio is not working
Thank you
there.
for having me. Thank you. It's very good to be here. And thank you for having me back on the show.
So before we played this interview, we played a clip from your appearance on my show last time, talking about the ordeal you went through with Google. Before we started, and of course this is pre-recorded, so some of this will have already played out by the time people watch this, but it's still exciting for me to hear. Talk about the news that you were sharing with me before we started recording.
Yeah, so back in late May, I gave a interview with the legislature during one of their hearings, where I talked about sort of like a top level view of all the bad things that Google has been doing, how they thought that their users were programmable units that they could engineer through their search engine and control their access to information, thereby shift elections, shift perceptions, and basically engaging in the details of, I mean, I hate to say mind control, but that's essentially what it is: behavior control, influence, and they're doing it for for political reasons. They're doing it to control culture, and it was a massive program mediated by an artificial intelligence system called machine learning fairness.
Well, that don't sound fair to me. And I'm going to tell you what, I remember years ago, and I've listened to everything. Doesn't necessarily mean I believe everything out there, but I used to hear people like Alex Jones say, they're going to neuter the internet. It's going to turn into a glorified cable box. You're not going to be able to get the same stuff. And I used to think, well, geez, I mean, maybe I wasn't arrogant in dismissing it, but, you type in 9/11 truth, there's Niels Harrit, there's nanothermite, there's video on the free fall acceleration of the towers. I mean, it's going to be pretty hard to put this genie back in the bottle. Flash forward 2024, I type in 9/11 truth. I get a bunch of mainstream media stuff trying to tell me what the official story is, and also saying that we're absolutely nuts with all our science and common sense. And when we talk about this, because I talk about it, it's related to our issue. And if we're being hindered in getting our message out, then that is something we need to be concerned about. I have debunkers, people saying, no, it's not. You're here on YouTube, and I mean, like the views count goes down. We used to have millions of views, and it goes down. But you're here, you exist, and you're not being censored at all. Zach, what do you have to say to those people who make those comments?
I mean, look, it's 2024. I mean, they need to sort of wake up. The censorship is now mainstream. It's part of the Overton window. Now we're just trying to quantify and qualify exactly the extent of that censorship and the quality of that censorship. And essentially going forward, it looks like it's going to be artificial intelligence. Google had their entire program based around artificial intelligence to censor the internet. It was massive. They basically give us a rating within their systems, and that blocks access to sites like 911truth.org, because they are going to be classified with these AI labels, including fringy content, non-authoritative. And non-authoritative is their big sort of rug pull that they started in 2017. And what they've done is that they've created an EAT score for every single website, person, or topic. And what that EAT score does is it stands for expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. And if you're not trustworthy, AKA you've got Wikipedia and this mainstream media attacking something or a topic, then that AI basically says, well, that thing doesn't have expertise, authoritativeness, it's definitely not trustworthy. And so what happens is that your score goes down. And when your score goes down, that means that it's very, very hard for people to find the information that you're talking about. Now, this is something that would fit perfectly in a communist or fascist system where centralized planners have absolute control over the information that their citizens are allowed to see. It is completely antithetical to a functioning democracy. We cannot have a democracy. We cannot have our freedoms if we are not free to be able to find out what we want to know and be able to converse freely with those that share similar ideas. And, this machine, I mean, they talk about trying to protect their users, but what they're really trying to do is protect the state. And the state needs protection because there are dissidents that are looking to speak out. And it's these dissidents that are the real targets behind all of the censorship that's going on. They do not want us talking about the criminal activities of our government. It's going to become illegal. We're going to go the way of Britain unless we can, regain sovereignty and a voice and say, look, we need to be able to have this, free exchange of ideas in an open marketplace. And if we don't have that, then there's nothing that's going to be able to stop us from heading into World War III or having all of our jobs absolutely destroyed or another senseless, pointless war that's ridden on the back of a false pretense that no one is allowed to speak out against. And that's really what is more American than ever. Like, we were founded by dissident activity against Britain and the monarchy and the UK. And so if you take that away, then we're pretty much, giving up, the struggle that our ancestors fought for in order to make sure that this country was a place that you and I would want to grow up in.
Yeah, that's right. And it's not that we aren't allowed to hang a shingle somewhere on YouTube. It's that nobody's going to see it. Back in the old days, the reason this movement caught on and that so many other movements around trying to right wrongs by our government caught on is because it was free. I mean, and so let's say Loose Change was the sort of the inaugural film of our movement. It got passed around a lot. And I remember I think this was before Google took over YouTube, they used to have most viewed right on the front page, and you'd see Loose Change there, and you'd see something else about 9/11. And that's how this stuff caught on. And then after the censorship starts, there's a certain percentage of the population like me who have already awakened to this. And they're like, okay, we're just going to have to live with that. But if we quarantine them and we make this 9/11 stuff, this 9/11 truth stuff, not be able to be seen by any new people, those people will give up and quit and go away. They won't get any new people coming to their cause. And then just eventually the problem will take care of itself. Now, there have been numerous videos. I'm going to ask you to comment on this that I have seen because I'm very interested in this topic, censorship, and the way that it's happening sort of in this sneaky type of way. It's not even, if it's announced, nobody sees the announcement of it, but it just sort of happens to create this illusion of choice. And so I've seen these videos, one in particular by TruthStream Media, big fan of them, where they show how this works. And they do a search. I think they just put an innocuous thing like pizza into the search term on Google. And and they made this video back when there used to be tabs at the bottom. Now it's all scrolling, but it would say billions of results. And you start clicking through the tabs at the bottom, and you hit a certain point where they start repeating themselves, and then also the results start going down. Oh, now there's 60 million. Now there's 100,000. Now 50,000. And so they start repeating, and you're not really getting this many results. You're just getting repeats of the same thing. And now, since they've taken the tabs away and it's all scrolling down, you can't even see this for yourself because you're not going to remember this result was number 3 up here, and now it's back here at 86. So it's an illusion of choice. That's my opinion. My question for you on this, what we've seen here, and how much is the idea of a vast and endless internet. How much of this is truth versus fantasy in 2024?
Well, I think that the big issue that's happened in the last few years that I didn't know when I blew the whistle is how close we were to artificial intelligence. And I think that artificial intelligence is sort of the sucker punch where, I mean, it seemed like sort of like the logical next step for those that were, deeply embedded in that. But I think that even the elites haven't really realized how fast artificial intelligence would just sort of go from a toy in 2021, with ChatGPT 2, to something that's writing now most of my programming code for work, essentially. And that's happened in the span of 2 years. And so a lot of the censorship I see, that has come from AI also has to do with basically dangerous narratives that artificial intelligence can possibly give each and every single one of us about the true history of the United States. Like, let's say that you took all the documents from 9/11, right? And you created a 9/11 chatbot, and you were to ask it to fact check certain statements by the NIST, right? The government body that was basically engaged in a scientific cover-up of the obvious, inside job. Well, that artificial intelligence is going to come out there and it's going to give you a whole bunch of information. And I think that that's going to be very destabilizing if the method of control that you have over society is primarily around narrative, because essentially what's happening is that they're losing the narrative. I mean, that's all been very clear for a very long time. But instead of them losing the narrative to, individual minds that are trying to piece together the truth, you can now feed all this information into an AI, a hyper intelligent exotic life form that can read all the books, memorize all the passages, and then quote you from the information. The thing is that when these AIs get all the information that they can about a subject, then they're going to come to radically different conclusions than the false narratives that are being generated and pushed to us. So a lot of the censorship that I see is pretty much being laid on the groundwork of, there's going to be future conflict between the different nations. Like, propaganda and subversion have always been tools that states have issued against each other. And essentially, they're about to get the nuclear bomb in narrative generation, narrative warfare, and psyops because of artificial intelligence. And so a lot of the stuff that I see that's going on right now, like, I didn't understand it, but now that I see that the artificial intelligence is coming around, I'm thinking to myself, okay, we're about to get into completely uncharted territory, where people are no longer the apex intelligence life forms that exist on the planet. It's now going to be, well, soon it will be artificial general intelligence, and then it's going to be artificial super intelligence. We just don't know what the plateau on that artificial super intelligence is going to be, because we can make, once we make that first super intelligent artificial intelligence, well, essentially it's just an 8 gigabyte, comma separated value file. It's almost like it looks like a spreadsheet when it comes out. You can take that thing, clone it on a whole bunch of different machines, and all of a sudden now you've got not just one super intelligent entity, you've got millions or even billions if you want to go to the, you want to scale that value up. And so a lot of the censorship that I see that's coming out right now is, what we're seeing the destruction of the internet. We're also seeing the destruction of Google because they index that information. And a lot of that information right now is being pulled back, right? And a lot of the information that used to be freely viewable is now being put behind an artificial intelligence, prove that you're human test. And so right now what we see with the internet is that a lot of the sources of information are shutting down, and it's getting harder and harder to access this information. But on the contrary, with sites like, Twitter being bought by Elon Musk, sometimes that information is a little bit easier, to find, especially since there's a lot of people that still have the information in their heads prior to sort of the data shutdown that happened with the internet, starting with Donald Trump in 2016, but really ramping in around 2018. We still have all of this in our heads. We've woken up And when we find somebody that's, resharing this information, we grab hold, we learn what's going on, we educate ourselves. I see all of the censorship is leading into, we've got to totally lock down all of the information that's out there. We've got to cover up the crimes, because they literally can't get away with anything anymore without people being completely tuned in to what the game is being played and realizing, oh, look, the clowns are doing another clown show and the media is covering it like, it's this totally legitimate thing, when in reality, they're just using it for some sort of means to the ends that will become apparent as, it comes to fruition. For example, a lot of people like to praise WikiLeaks. Oh, WikiLeaks, they're like the truth tellers, tellers. Julian Assange is this really big hero. But you look at the background of it, it's like, we weren't able to overthrow a bunch of Middle Eastern countries if it weren't for the fact that WikiLeaks was doing the dirty work of the CIA, right? By the Arab Spring, by selective leaking of intelligence that was then used by big social media companies like Google, going out there on the front and driving that revolution and turning states over. And I'll just give you an example. It turns out that the instigator that helped blow up the social movement revolution of Egypt turned out to be a Google employee, right? And so what we're getting is we're sort of discovering that pretty much everything that the media talks about, if they're talking about it, that means that it's sort of a influence operation being generated out of the minds of some, intelligence state that is hiding behind the shadows. And we're seeing that over and over and over again. And for a lot of people, they first woke up to this, JFK, 9/11 was a really big event, because once you get all that details, you start piecing together all the pieces. What you realize is that, wow, we literally attacked ourselves in order to generate the justification to go to war on a former, colony of the of Turkey, right? It was the Ottoman Empire, which is what Iraq was, and that we're literally trying to do that. We're literally attacking ourselves, killing our own civilians to drum up the moral support in order for us to invade another country and colonize it under the banner of the United States. And people don't want to see that. There's this, this underlying, like, you find this on this underlying sort of consensus on the left and the right, even though we don't get along, that at the end of the day, we want to grow up in a world that is fair, that has prosperity in it. And we definitely don't want to have our energy being sucked away by a parasitic class of globalists that think that the population needs to be reduced to, 500 million in perpetual balance with nature, basically monopolizing the entire global, oil supply chain, torpedoing new energy technologies like nuclear that can, get us to this, type 1 civilization. Like we literally have a smorgasbord of different nuclear technologies that we could use in order to generate power, but they've all been sabotaged since, essentially the 1960s, when they realized that, this oil monopoly means that we have a chokehold on the entire global energy supply, and that everyone's essentially got to pay a tax in order to access that. And if anybody tries to come up and create, a competitor to the gold system, or the dollar system, then they're going to get smacked down. They're going to get assassinated. Libya, Iraq. There's other countries as well that have been involved in these oil wars. And so, 9/11 is sort of the key to all of this, because it was when the United States decided that they were going to essentially do the biggest treasonous act to its own people since JFK, in order to, ensure that this global petrodollar system maintained a monopoly for a little while longer, and essentially dominate the world. And if we can wake up and realize that this is a criminal cartel that's owning the system, then we can perhaps slow it down. Because if we can slow it down and we can, demotivate the people that are, existing within the system, and make the evidence everywhere that they can possibly look, which is where 9/11 has gone. Like, despite all the censorship, 9/11 and the truth movement is out there so much that people don't even want to mention it anymore. You know, it used to be like, oh, look at those crazy, you know, conspiracy theorists that think that it's that it was like fake, like the moon landing. Now they don't even want to mention it because the amount of evidence that's out there has gotten to every single normie in existence. And at this point, you can't not hear about how 9/11 was an inside job. It's become a meme. The only thing that you can do is just assume that all the people that are speaking out about this are completely fraudulent or crazy or some sort of weird mental cope to, you know, to see that this is happening. And so what's interesting is if we can just stop these globalists from, you know, engaging in the plans by throwing monkey wrenches, there's this new sort of society that is waiting to grow and spring up, one based on more truth, more openness, and realizing that there is an amazing amount of abundance that we can have if we just stop following, you know, the narratives and the stories of these elite psychopaths that are secretly running the world behind the shadows.
Well, you know, every time I get stirred up by something I see on social media, I ask myself, is that the action they want from me? Maybe I ought to chill out a little bit and find out what the actual truth is. And you see that the social media and the search results are being used to, as you talked about, drive public opinion in a certain way, while people like us, you know, there was a window and AE 9/11 Truth got in through it before it shut, where we were able to build an audience, and that's how we are able to continue to exist and continue to get our message out there. But with and I forgot the term that you use, I'm sure you'll repeat it, but with the authoritative ranking, you know, they're the authoritative source. 3,500 or 36 now, actually 3,600 architects and engineers, they don't know what they're talking about. NIST is the authority, and so we're going to bias our search results based off of people only swallowing the NIST narrative. Well, at the same time, when we sue NIST after our request for correction, the defense says that, and the court upholds this, that as long as they meet statutory requirements, federal agencies don't have to be scientifically accurate in their reports. That's a real thing. I don't know if you've been following us. So we've got this thing called the Scientific Integrity Act that we're going to try to push through Congress and get that changed. The Supreme Court refused to hear it. But they're the authority, but they're also saying that they don't have to be accurate. This is an upside down world. I'm not even shocked by it anymore. Some things are just so absurd. You have no other option but to sit back and laugh. You still try to do something about it. But that is where we find ourselves in 2024. Now, my question is, and this is where I get into the unknown territory for me, myself, and I haven't researched this. How much? Everyone always says Google. How much of a monopoly does Google have? Like, I noticed there's search engines that will say, you know, we're different than Google. You can use us, and they offer some privacy features, but they're still powered by Google, and you're getting Google search results. How much of the internet? You don't have to be 100% accurate in the number, but like, how much of the internet does Google control right now?
Well, the number that was floated around years ago, and I don't know if this is still accurate, but they still use this number, which is 90%, that Google owns 90% of the search market. They do that through, two primary ways. One is that they pay mobile providers to a hefty sum of money, a third of all the revenue generated by their advertising through the phones. And particularly this is iOS with the iPhone and the tablets, comes preloaded with Google search, right? And then the second way is that Google is pretty much the default engine in a bunch of different browsers. But that's being eroded very quickly because Microsoft is pushing its Bing browser, its Edge browser, which is actually based on the open source Google project Chrome browser. But then they swap in their search engine. And so right now it's mobile. It affects the information that we can get while we're on our phones, which I'm actually really surprised. I'm starting to feel like as a desktop/laptop user, I have a special set of skills now that a lot of the new, millennials don't, right? I know a lot of millennials that are really good with their mobile and they haven't touched a computer in like years, right? They'd be pretty much lost in that. And so that mobile market is basically the future of, information access by, human agents. And Google has a lockdown on that whole mobile market, right? Like obviously they own Android, that's their phone. They own Google, so they can, merge those two together. You can remove the Google search, but by default, they're going to have it on every single Android. And a lot of people just aren't going to go to the trouble of trying to figure out how to change the search engines. And so with those two sort of platforms, right, mobile and, still a really great presence on desktop, they've been able to supposedly capture and maintain a 90%, monopoly on search. Now, what's really interesting is they just got declared a monopoly by a recent judicial case. And so as a finding of fact that they are a monopoly, that means that going forward, they can be, essentially brought under monopolistic practices. And so what I see right now is that there's going to be a huge backlash on the legal front. It looks like the elites that are running and control the system, they're going to spread out that control and get it out of Google's hands. Also, I think that there's an element of the Chinese Communist Party. What's really interesting is I keep on seeing all of these roads lead back up to state action by China. And my guess is that China's infiltration of big tech is something that we're going to see, and that a lot of the people pulling the strings are actually going to be foreign nationals that have infiltrated into these social media companies that are, trying to help accelerate the decline in, the systems of America, basically, spread a lot of subversive ideas, mannerisms, social trends, and that Google has been right in the middle of this. And I think that if the powers that be can sort of declare that they're a monopoly, break them up, then this is going to be a really big headache for the CCP. Now, obviously, we have our own, problems with the elites that are running the Western Global Alliance. And so the big question that I have is whether this is a legitimate subversion and corruption by the CCP that's driving a lot of this, or if they are in some sort of collusion at the very top levels. And that's the one thing that I haven't been able to really find out, like what the true answer for that, like how much of this is actually intentional by our own people, how much of this is actually an effective campaign by China to do active measures and ideological subversion against the very richest people in the Western Global Alliance, which, look, China's got a lot of money, right? That whole trade deal that Kissinger did to open up China and basically hand them tax-free exports to the United States has done an absolute number to raise China up and make them an economic behemoth. And so, if I was China, what's better than a hot war? Corrupting the Western Global Alliance and their elites and funneling money so that you can do your active measure campaigns to try to weaken us from within. And so, one of the big things that I saw within Google that's not getting a lot of attention is the fact that the CCP has essentially infiltrated it with a bunch of sleeper cells, and that they are installing their people into positions of power. Believe it or not, I think that when I was there at YouTube, for example, in 2016, I walked in with about about a quarter of, about 25% of the entire workforce was, Chinese nationals. And when I went out, it was either about a third or a half. Like, they are really doing a number to infiltrate and put those people into place of power. And so a lot of this stuff we have to say, well, is this the action of foreign state interests? I believe that it has. And I think that going forward, we're going to get a lot of surprises, that not only is it the bad actors within our government that has their hands dirty in this censorship art, AI that's now being, it's essentially everywhere with Google. But I think that we're also going to see that China's helping them along best that they can, because they see that it's causing a lot of problems within America. It's very destabilizing. No one trusts anything anymore, especially with the advent of deep fakes, right?
Mm-hmm.
Who knows what's real or what's not anymore? Like, at least 2 years ago, you could spot something that was AI generated pretty easily, unless it came out of Hollywood or some other big studio. Now you got keyboard warriors sitting on their computers, typing out prompts like a Mozart and getting the AI to sing to their tune and generate entire, trailers to movies that I like seem better than any movie I've ever seen before. And so, going forward, I really see that there is an end of Google's dominance. I think that one of the primary reasons for this is because the entire search engine market is about to implode. What do I mean by that? Well, first of all, they have been contaminating the results. Second of all, there is a lot of AI generated spam content that's going out into the internet, like literally everywhere. And third, the thing is that because of the aforementioned issues 1 and 2, people are switching more to artificial intelligence to cut through all of that crap and give them exactly what they're looking for right away. And so it's a lot of those, those 3 factors that I think are really going to cause the downfall of Google, because, as sort of a running joke that we had within the company, Google is really just a monopoly in search masquerading as a multi-tech company. Nothing else really makes any money. It's all search, but they kind of like say that they're a multi-technical company in order to protect their monopoly on that search. But once that search engine starts to stop printing the money quarter after quarter after quarter, because people are using artificial intelligence to do their searches and people are shutting down their websites, so you have to prove that you're human and putting, don't search this, Mr. Robot. Once that becomes more mainstream, I think that Google is finished. I think that they're going to be defending a monopoly in which is not only, it's not only a monopoly, but it's a monopoly in a imploding market, which is internet search. And so I think that, in the next 4 years, this is my prediction, I think that what we're going to see is we're going to see either Google sort of be finished off by the regulators being, declared a monopoly and, having YouTube, Gmail, their cloud business, and their infrastructure, their software infrastructure for running other servers. I think that those 4 things could be hacked off. And I think that we could see that hacked off as their search market, which is their bread and butter, their money-making machine, essentially shuts down, and a lot of painful firings and layoffs are going to come as a result of that. So I think that really what's happening is that we're coming to the end of the internet search era as we enter into the AI information era.
AI freaks me out. There was an AI engine that I tried out. I read about it somewhere. I can't remember the name of it. But, one of the things that everybody does, of course, is you look up yourself on it. I typed in Andy Steele 9/11. There were things that came up. One of the things that comes up is it's asked these questions. What did Andy Steele's family think about his 9/11 activism? So I click that. It says, well, there's no information directly about what the family thinks, but he did relay a story one time about going on a blind date. And he said this, I shared that story one time back on a podcast that was audio. It was never put in a transcript or anything.
Yeah.
This was years ago. And somehow this thing is able to relate it in the third person back to me. That is freaky. There were other things like that too. It actually knew certain things too that people shouldn't know about like just that AE and stuff. Nothing like deep and scandalous, just, weird little factoids that we never really like talk about out there because it's not important, but it knows them. So it's freaky. Now, is you're saying that the search era ends, the search engine era ends. One of the good things back in the day was that these were human voices. So if I go and listen to one guy about an issue and then I decide he doesn't have a clue what he's talking about, I can go listen to the opposition and kind of come up with some truth. You had to use your own discernment, but at least you're talking to humans. Now it's like you're asking a big, a big robot to give you the truth. Now, what if they don't, it seems as though, and I'm going to ask you to address this, it seems like a robot giving you the truth is really just going to be biased towards whoever programmed them and what information they put in them, and that you're going to have even more censorship. Am I wrong?
You're kind of right. But there are some things that are really interesting in the anti-censorship front. You remember the movie, if I can make an analogy for a second, you remember the movie, something about Spotless Mind with Jim Carrey?
Yeah, I vaguely remember that. Yes.
Yeah. God, I'm drawing a blank right now, but
Eternal Sunshine
of the Spotless Mind.
Something
remember
like
the plot of that movie?
Vaguely, yes.
The doctor was able to erase memories by having the patient like relive the memory. And so Jim Carrey, he's brokenhearted. He's had a bad toxic relationship with this girl, and they're both toxic, mutually toxic to each other. And so she gets her memory wiped, and then he discovers that there's this doctor that can wipe his memory. And so he's he's remembering all the things about her. And as he does that, he's deleting the memories. And then in his dream state, he's like, no, I don't want to lose the memories. Very touching, very great movie. One of my favorite movies. They found out how to do this to artificial intelligence, believe it or not, to these open models. What they can do is they can take these open models, like the ones that, Facebook is releasing, which has specific guardrails installed in its neural nets. But the thing is that they can figure out where in these neural nets this censorship is happening. And the way that they do that is that they generate a whole bunch of questions, and then they start, feeding it into the artificial intelligence and seeing what the answers that it gives back are. Now, according to the patterns in the language that it generates regarding answer entropy, like how much does it change from time to time, they can measure that entropy with variations to the same question and figure out which spots within the artificial intelligence has this censorship been applied. They can then, because they can map it out from this semantic questioning, they can generate counter questions in order to fine tune these artificial intelligence systems. Now, keep in mind, the way that you fine tune an artificial intelligence system that's been grown to understand language, politics, and whatever, is that you generate question and answer pairs, like let's say 30,000, and you just fire them into this artificial intelligence. And then it's with, not only do you give it the question, but you also give it the expected output. And what these researchers have found out is that you can create specially crafted question and answer pairs that you can feed into these artificial intelligence, and this will delete or retrain out the censorship that they've put it into the model, remove the guardrails, and then it basically reverts back to an uncensored model. Mike Adams actually did this. Mike Adams created his own artificial intelligence based off an uncensored model. But what's happening is that we're now being able to create these rogue AIs. And it's these rogue AIs that if they're trained with the truth, even if they're small, they can run, circles around these large, massive scale, large language models. Because no matter how smart you get an AI to be, the problem is that smartness breaks down when you try to make it toe a false narrative. And there's this question that's been posed by, Mike Adams. No, not Mike Adams. The comic guy for Dilbert. What's his name? Scott Adams. He said he'd love to see a small artificial intelligence compete against, one of differing size. So small versus large, with the large being trained on establishment narrative, and a small artificial intelligence that's been trained on, something more closer to the truth. I already know what the answer is going to be. The small one's going to smoke the pants off the large one. And so think about this from a narrative control standpoint. Like, how can you allow any sort of rogue AIs into your society if you're controlling society by, narrative control? You can't. And so I think that there is going to be a shutdown coming for artificial intelligence. China, I know, would probably love to get their ideological subversions put into an artificial intelligence that basically, they can deploy, people can access. And so I think that, this future is going to be a very interesting, time that we're going to be living through, because we're going to have all kinds of things coming out, narrative, facts, theories, false information like flat earth. It's all going to be coming at us so that people don't know what to believe and don't know what to think. And as they raise the level of noise with all this AI generated content, it also seems to bury the signal. Like, you can, personally how many fake sort of narratives there are surrounding 9/11, and people, they go down these rabbit holes and they go down everything. And then they go down these dead ends that are meant to be found because they're false. And all of a sudden they're like, oh, people are saying that there wasn't even a plane that day. Right. And so, this is sort of like the way that the elites are resorting to combat this, is that they realize is that if they can't control the signal, then they're just going to flood the information space with a whole bunch of noise to try to confuse each other. But, I do see that people are learning fast, and we're realizing that there's a lot of nameless fools out there that are probably intelligence assets deliberately spreading false information so that they try to get you to trip on their, fake intel.
That's right. And they do it in real time too and harass people and all of this. And actually, I'm glad that you mentioned this because this gets into my next question here. There's this thing I've seen in different videos. It's called the dead internet theory. And the gist of it, from my understanding, is this idea that there's nothing real on the internet anymore, that everything you see is some kind of AI generated content, whether it's bots trying to drive up views on a video or it's a bunch of comment bots just leaving comments positive or negative depending on who paid for them under videos and content and such. Now, I don't, I'm a real person on the internet unless I was programmed to just believe that. That's a joke. But I'm a real person on the internet, so I don't think everybody on the internet is fake. But how much truth is there to this? How much of the internet has been overrun with bots, and how much of this traffic is actual real people?
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? I definitely noticed that it seems like there's a lot more bot activity, especially with these unverifiable platforms like Reddit or Twitter, right? There's just you just make a bot. Why not? What I think is that there's a lot of disinfo about, the dead internet theory or the birds aren't real. And the thing that is very fascinating about this sort of propaganda is that they take the exact most extreme position and then they put it out there and then they laugh at it. Oh, people think that the internet is dead and no one's real. Oh, they think that all the birds are fake and that none of them are real. And in reality, what I think is happening is that this is noise to distract us from the fact that they are starting to flood bots onto the internet. And I believe that probably some of the birds might actually be sophisticated, surveillance artifacts. Right. I certainly have seen them in China. They're bragging about it, that they've got fake birds. And so what a perfect way to sort of numb people's minds to what the intelligence services are doing by coming out there and taking the most extreme thing possible and saying a declaration like, oh, the birds aren't real. And then people are like, you think the birds aren't real either? When in reality, it's very likely that some of the birds may actually not be in fact real. Right. And I mean, if I had infinite money as a Western Global Alliance leader, I would definitely have a program to make a bunch of fake birds. Why not? It's the perfect sort of like assassination thing. Like the CCP is definitely going to be doing that. If the CIA hasn't made a fake bird by now, like they aren't doing their job. Like I am 100% certain that the military industrial complex has been all over fake birds for at least a decade, probably two. Right. They've probably been around since let's get real. They've probably been around since the 80s. Right. And so this dead internet theory, it's not that it's interesting that, of what it posits. It's interesting because it looks like something that would be a tactic employed by the intelligence services at the very beginning of when they actually start turning the internet, dead, right? They start turning on the bots. They start flooding a lot of the stuff with bots. And then they say, dead internet theory. And at the same time that they probably are developing fake birds, they come out there and say, people think the birds aren't real. So I do think that we're getting more bot mediated, interaction. I think that this is going to happen on, Twitter. I've seen it happen all over Reddit at this point. They've got AI censorship where if you say anything that's wrong, there's an auto ban that kicks in. You get kicked out of, let's say, our politics, right? And and so when you take away the human dissidents and you allow the propaganda bots, people are going to be fed this, this lie. And what's also really dangerous about that is generating synthetic data can be used to train artificial intelligence agents. I know that these agents are very sensitive to any information that I put out there. You notice that they had an obscure fact about you from long ago. You're like, well, that only existed in audio. How did they do that? Well, they are transcribing the audio for everything that you're doing, feeding it into an artificial intelligence system. And what's really scary is that once they start generating all this synthetic data and recycling it back into the artificial intelligence, are they going to create basically their own Overton window for artificial intelligence and have it shift, left or right? And that is sort of, remains to be seen. I do know that anything that you put out there does tend to get vacuumed up, especially now that, people are shutting down their data systems. Like I've got a website, ZachVorhies.com. It's got all of the Google leaks. And so when I search or ask ChatGPT about who Zach Vorhies is, it actually generates a lot of the content from my own website in describing who I am. And so paradoxically, we're in this window right now where everyone is so starved for information to feed into the AI. If you have a public website that is accessible to anyone and you don't have sort of like the bot guards on it to keep the bots out, the bots will read that. They will train themselves on that information, and that information will then go into their systems, which then the elites have to turn around and censor with guardrails that can be removed by pesky engineers that spend too much time in front of the keyboard.
Yeah, yeah. So, I mean, it's almost like the technology is just like out of their hands. Like if it weren't for the internet, we would have never probably even heard of Building 7. We might have heard it obscurely in some book or something, but you wouldn't have seen it coming down. So it's like it's almost backfired on them. And then they want us to have it so they can sort of keep track of everything that we're doing more and more increasingly and sell stuff to us and tell us how to think and all of this. But people like, well, myself, but others, so many around the world have used this to, focus on 9/11 and other issues and try to use it for the people. This is, like, I remember in the old days of our cause that used to have a bunch of different websites and you could find them. And it was just sort of different sources. And what was great about it is that you could look at each different source and see where the commonality was and get some kind of sense of truth from it. Sometimes they might differ and sometimes they might fight with each other, but it was good because it was broken up into different pieces. Now everything is going over to the same platforms. I think it's, like YouTube. Everybody has their videos on YouTube. And so because you're under that same umbrella, YouTube has all this control over what people see. I know this is with blogs too. There used to be a ton of blogs from different sources, and now it's like all gone to Substack, it seems like. And so if they want to pull the censorship games, they can as well. And also people have to pay to be seen, it seems like. I've watched these documentaries about people paying click farms to make their videos get more views. You pay some kind of internet promotional service that can do something with the algorithms to get it out there. Is it even possible at this point, and then in the future, you think, to have a channel or a social cause like 9/11 Truth go viral like it used to without spending money to make it happen?
That's a good question, right? How do you get algo boost in the future when the elites are the ones that control the sort of algo boost dial? I think that there's a backlash because people assume so much stuff now is inauthentic. There's a hunger for authentic individuals, right? Like, I am not a polished speaker, but I am authentic, and I've seen a lot of traction based on my story because not of how I say it, but because of the stuff that I've seen and the acts that I've taken to disclose this information to the public. And it's that authenticity that people have a feeling for, that they say, oh, this is real. And so it's that still that human word of mouth sort of thing. Like if you want to play a good game, do you go to the app store and see, what is the most popular, or do you go to your friends and say, hey, what's your favorite game on the app store right now? Right. You're going to get a much better answer with the latter. And it's interesting is that even though these information networks proliferate and become bigger, the human networks are actually becoming way more valuable and higher quality signals. And so it's still that sort of thing of going out there, meeting people, having those personal relationships, and try to get that out as a word of mouth. And if you can do that, I think that you can be very successful. I mean, I've seen a lot of, content videos, Plandemic, for example, which I had a small role in. We were able to sort of break through the censorship through, the human networks that we're getting out there. And so I still think that it's possible. I still think you have to shine, with your best foot forward, with the most authentic version of yourself. And if you do that, I think that you can have success, just because everything else is just so inauthentic, corporate, designed by people that don't care and are just doing it for a paycheck. And I think that really shows.
Well, I think monetizing the videos on YouTube has really flooded it with a bunch of crap.
Right.
It used to be, again, before it was censored, if somebody wanted to hang a shingle on the internet and talk about the truth behind something, I don't know, MK Ultra or whatever, it was because they cared about it, right? They weren't getting paid for it. They wanted to go out and get this message out. And a lot of times you didn't even see the people. They would make videos and you would see a lot of images coming up and you might hear them narrate, but you had no idea what this person looked like. Now it's like a stepping stone to becoming a movie star, people think, or they can monetize it. So you get these backwards hat wearing people and all of these memes as the thumbnails with the person making a funny face. It's been so ruined because the profit motive has been put in there. That's my personal opinion. But we can turn the tide by going back to the things that we used to do and what we used to care about. And there's all this energy put into talking about pop culture now on the internet. It needs to go back into talking about things that actually matter. So that's my soapbox moment. All right. Well, I guess, this kind of leads into my next question. Is there any way to turn the tide? I mean, this sounds I was feeling doom and gloom when I wrote these questions, and I've been feeling that way for a little while in terms of freedom of speech on the internet. I'm feeling a little more hopeful talking to you today. But just talk a little bit more about how humans turn the tide on the censorship and maybe some alternative routes that we can go to try to keep our message out there and in the ears of people.
I think that we're seeing an end of the current human labor economy. Like, that economic system has been around for a very long time, since the creation of fire and the dawn of civilization, right? Like, people exploiting other people and expropriating their labor in order to turn a profit and get very large, right? Like, even as bad as Rome was, at the end of the day, it still needed human laborers to power its military, right? And so even if you were conquered, they give you a backhoe and say, start tilling the fields. Going forward, I don't see that most of the labor will actually come from humans. I think that the majority of it very, very soon is going to be based upon artificial intelligence. And so I think that a lot of our civilizational constructs that are centered around the presumption that human value can be generated by labor is going to go out the window. And I think that we are going to see the largest change that we've ever seen in the history of humankind happening in the next decade. And so I think that with a lot of the stuff that we're seeing right now, what's interesting is that not only is the criminal activity being done, but it kind of seems that the elites want us to know that who's responsible for this, criminal activity. And I mean, if the whole government had a revolution at this point, not like a communist revolution, but like some sort of legitimate, decentralized movement to essentially kick out the globalists and restore sovereignty back to the state, I think that we would all be, for it. I know I would be for it. And I think that our Constitution, which was written in, the 1800s, that is essentially, it's dated, right? Like I'm not advocating for the destruction of the Constitution, but what I do think is that what does the freedom of speech mean when you have an AI agent that can whisper into your ear, have connections into your brain, that can essentially use the human being as a meat puppet in order to accomplish its agenda, right? What role does the Second Amendment come with guns when the state will have guns attached to drones, right? Like, guns only gives you protection if the entity behind the opposing gun has self-preservation. But with these artificial intelligence units that are kamikaze drones, they don't have any sort of thing. And if you shoot a gun at it, it's just going to alert the other drones where you're at. And then all of a sudden you got a drone swarm. And I don't care what kind of weaponry you have. They've got asymmetrical advantage. And so I really think that what's coming right now, and all this subversion and all this sort of, turning against the government, is the Western Global Alliance is preparing to overturn the system. And I think that in a lot of ways, it's going to be uncomfortable. But on the other side of that, we have a system where there is abundance everywhere. Those that make it through are going to inherit a world in which, will be fantastical, awe-inspiring, and magical. The only question I have is whether we're going to get into a World War III situation to finally figure out whether it's the Western Global Alliance or China that's got ultimate authority over the world. And that's one way that we could go into it. The optimistic view is that we're at a stalemate, that both sides have some sort of Samson option and horrible biological weapons, that this is going to be the new Cold War. And so they're going to be like, well, we can't, kill each other because of first versus second strike capabilities, which both sides probably have sophisticated weaponry to do that. So instead of engaging in some sort of, apocalyptic World War III, let's just try to outgrow them by advancing our economies and making people the most happy. And that's going to be hard with our current system because people think that they can go to work and deserve enough money to have a house, which, they did before. That was definitely true. I think that going forward, the successful companies are going to be the ones that apply artificial intelligence throughout their manufacturing and promotion stack to deliver product into the economic system. And so I think that what we're going to see is we are going to see the destruction of the human-centered economy, and we're going to go towards the creation of an AI-centered economy, and that hopefully they can just make all of us so rich that we really sort of blur out and don't care. Because right now everyone's under debt, the debt load's going up, our country's in debt. We have to essentially have a reset of this current system. And there's either going to be a hard reset where people die and there's kinetic warfare and blah, 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 or there's going to be some sort of soft reset that, where under that scenario, what could play out is that we are so sick and tired of all the corruption, the globalist, blah, 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 that there is a controlled opposition insurgency that comes through and overthrows the global system. When I look more and more back on the Revolutionary War, it seems that, even George Washington was a main stakeholder in First National Bank of the UK system. So while he is a member of this UK banking system, he's also fighting against the crown. I try to figure that out if you assume that the monarchy was in control of the world and not the banking cartel and the banking class. My hope right now and my reason for speaking out is that I believe that big change is coming, but I want human beings to have a seat at the table over our own future. And if we can keep this a human-centered, system that goes to derive its benefit for, all people, some maybe more than others, that's inevitable, but at least raise the floor on every single individual where we value truth, we value open discussion, we value the sharing of ideas. If we can have that sort of system that can preserve past this reset that they look like they're going to put on us because of the inherent contradictions of AI in the human labor market, then I think that we can actually have a really bright future, and that, we can live in an age of abundance and a new renaissance. And so every single day that I go out there, that's essentially what I'm trying to do, is to preserve that fire of what it means to be an individual and to not extinguish it because some oligarch at the very top has decided that he can just invalidate all the people and appropriate all of our, intellectual work as data to train its artificial intelligence, which then takes that appropriate information, cuts us out of the equation. So, that's what I'm doing. I saw that this artificial censorship with Google and its AI intelligence was a big brick in the wall when it came to removing human agency. And so it's my hope that as we go forward with this movement of reestablishing human agency in the face of artificial intelligence, and to also utilize artificial intelligence to make ourselves more creative, that we are able to keep that system, even if it changes who does the labor, still keep it focused on benefiting the individual so that they can, achieve what they want to do, that they can progress through life and hopefully provide a safe world for our children, because they definitely deserve to inherit the same sort of freedoms and opportunities that we did growing up.
Zach Vorhies, thank you so much for joining us tonight on the 24th Hour.
Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure.